If the president makes such a promise, it means a lot. It's about credibility of his personal credibility and credibility of the country which he represents. And if he promised something, his word should be firm, no matter what. But when he backtracks or is trying to backtrack on this promise, honestly, I don't understand this.
First thing, Burnham there in Ukraine announcing the UK will provide Ukraine with the blueprints that are needed to build its own deep strike missiles. He addressed allies at a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, so-called, in Kyiv, and he noted the Kremlin's anger at Britain.
I've only been in office a short time, but already in that time, Russia has threatened the UK for its support for the Ukraine, and I know other countries here have faced similar threats. It just shows that what we are doing is having an impact.
The Prime Minister also set out his vision for securing peace.
No doubt we will continue to hear desperate claims from Russia that their victory is inevitable and that they will escalate if Ukraine does not negotiate on their terms. We should expose this false narrative. The clear message to Putin should be that Ukraine will never give up territory that Russia cannot win on the battlefield, and negotiations must start from the line of contact. On that basis, we should keep pressing Russia to agree to a full and unconditional ceasefire now and work with the US on that effort.
And that's Andy Burnham speaking a little earlier. Let's now first of all welcome to the programme John Foreman, who is a former British Defence Attaché in Moscow and in Kyiv. John, welcome to you.
Hello, John.
Hi, thanks for coming on. Now, we'll come in a moment to the latest support for Ukraine's missile programme, but just tell me, in your judgment, from your own experience, what is the value of Andy Burnham's visit to Kyiv today, the value to Ukraine and to the people of that country?
Well, I think there's firstly value to Andy Burnham himself. As you pointed out, he may not know much about foreign policy, not be interested in it, but foreign policy is going to be interested in him. So I think it's an opportunity to find his voice and act on the world stage. And it strikes me he's taken that opportunity quite well. I think also it's important to Ukraine to show that Britain's still behind Ukraine in its hour of need, and that there's no space between Burnham and his predecessors. Also, that the UK is fully aligned with its European and other partners. And also he's not going to be deterred by Russian bluster and threats. So if those are the objectives, I think he's gone quite a long way to achieve those.
And it's worth pointing out, isn't it, John, that the attitude of Ukraine's friend, including Britain, has evolved significantly over these recent years. We're now looking at the Ukraine's striking at energy sites. It's been hitting the vast online shopping business, Wildberries, which is a big change of gear on the part of Ukraine. And now we see the allies of Ukraine going along with this shift in tactics and strategy.
Well, I think the British approach has been consistent from the very first stage of the war when Boris Johnson set out why we were interested in the war. Firstly, about Russia's war in Ukraine destabilises Europe. And secondly, because it's the right thing to do, because we've all stood up against, as he said in his speech, the inherent right of nations to defend themselves. And that's what Ukraine's doing. So I think the military strategy may have changed, but the political strategy has been the same from the British perspective. I think on these deep strikes, what's really limited Ukraine in the past, it didn't really have the assets to do what it wanted to do. And I think that huge amounts of work's gone on in the last couple of years to bring those technologies to bear on Russia, both in terms of Ukrainian drones and Ukrainian missiles, backed up where necessary by the provision of Western equipment to help Ukraine reduce the Russian war machine.
Okay, and Russia, they are making a show of anger now, aren't they? And maybe that's exactly as you would expect. Do you think that anger on the part of Russia, saying that Britain will face consequences for its position in sending blueprints for missiles or missile components to Ukraine, there'll be consequences for that? Does that really add up to anything? Anything new, do you think?
Well, Russia's been threatening Britain with consequences since 2022 and before. And I think it's part and parcel of the dialogue which you get from the Kremlin. I think any anger which the Kremlin is feeling is because of its own mad decisions to invade Ukraine in the first place, and also as a response to what it's been doing to the people of Ukraine for the last 4.5 years. As I said, Ukraine's quite within its own right to defend itself. I think on these missiles, it's an evolution of capabilities we provided to the Ukrainians in their wish to remain an independent, sovereign and democratic country as expressed on their Independence Day, rather than a shift from our side.
Okay, now what about the internal politics of Ukraine? There seems to be more of that, which is now very visible. We've seen Volodymyr Zelensky at odds with his former defence minister, who's now been driven out of the government, Mikhailo Fedorov. Is this significant, especially where the war effort is concerned, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's very significant. I think it's another own goal by President Zelensky. You remember last year he tried to close down one of the anti-corruption bodies. People protested against that. He reversed his decision and his chief of staff was sacked and then arrested. So I think, again, this is another sort of damaging affair because it exposed, shall we say, the tensions behind the scene between the newer reformist, technocratic European model, which we want Ukraine to be, and also some of the sort of darker sides of corruption and infighting and elite interests. What's happened is, of course, that Fedorov was sacked. He's now gone on a counterattack causing for elections, which I think is wrong. And actually, I think Ukrainians are against having elections during wartime, and also he wasn't backed by his own supporters. But I think the affair has been damaging to Ukraine, damaging to Zelensky, and it's given plenty of fuel for Russia to sort of crow from over the border.
Okay. Now, just lastly, let me ask you about the latest meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, talking about international cooperation in overseeing a ceasefire as and when that ceasefire comes along. How much significance do you attach to those talks and how they should proceed? Because we do have Putin consistently saying he's not interested in a ceasefire in which NATO members take part in overseeing the ceasefire in any possible way. It's not quite clear to me how this coalition will deal with that flat refusal by Putin.
Yeah, I think the Coalition of Willing has also been criticised as the Coalition of Waiting because we're not prepared to put troops on the ground until there's a ceasefire to monitor. I don't think it's going to be between the two sides, but I think what the Coalition of the Willing has evolved from over the last 18 months or so is from a sort of military-focused collective to one which is much more focused on political, diplomatic, financial and technical support to Ukraine. So whilst all the planning's gone on for the military side and they're doing exercises and we've got a command structure, I think it's ready to go. I think what they're looking today is about how you support Ukraine through the winter, which is the real big factor coming up, how we put greater costs on Russia, financial costs, and also I think, as we heard Burnham say, to reiterate the position of Europe, which is speaking with one voice on peace demands, in particular that there's no allowing Russia to gain ground in Ukraine, which it hasn't managed to win on the battlefield.
All right, John, thank you for joining us today. That was John Foreman, the former British defence attaché in Moscow and in Kyiv. Now we can get a Ukrainian perspective, and welcome to Drive Oleksandr Merezhko, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Kyiv. Hello to you, Oleksandr. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Always welcome, Oleksandr. Tell me your take. What is your view of the real significance of Andy Burnham's first foreign visit to Kyiv today?
It's extremely important visit from all perspectives. First of all, we appreciate very highly, and for us it's a strong signal or gesture of support and solidarity with us when the British Prime Minister makes his first overseas visit to Ukraine. It means that Ukraine remains to be a high priority on the British agenda in terms of foreign policy. So it means a lot to us. And he came with a certain sort of even gift for us, which might bring closer the peace to Ukraine. I mean, his promise that the UK will provide the necessary documents with regard to manufacturing ballistic missiles, which will allow us to continue deep strikes and will allow us to defend ourselves better. So we're grateful to the British people, to your parliament, to Prime Minister. And, it's important because we have strategic partnership for 100 years. The UK is viewed in Ukraine as one of the closest friends and allies of our country.
Okay, so as you say, you're being given by Andy Burnham the blueprints for a component of what would become the Ukrainian equivalent of a Storm Shadow missile. In France, they call them the Scalp missile. Is that really a game changer? It would take a good long while for Ukraine to develop the capacity to build these weapons, and there are other components which are in pretty short supply.
Well, honestly, I don't believe in this concept of game changer or a miracle weapon which can drastically change the whole situation. But it will be one of the most important components in our defense, and it will definitely help us to survive and to continue to repel Russian attacks more effectively. In the final analysis, it's about human lives. It will allow to save more lives of Ukrainians. The question now is when we receive these blueprints, how to start manufacturing as soon as possible, because ahead of us is difficult winter. It might be another difficult winter when we'll be fighting, struggling for our survival, and we need such weaponry right now. But on our part, we will do everything we can to speed up the process of producing these crucially important missiles.
Okay, so the blueprints could go towards making a weapon which would be significant in time. But meanwhile, Ukraine is terribly vulnerable to ballistic missile strikes from Russia, and you're terribly short of the Patriot anti-missile missiles, to which you look to America. I mean, just to set out for us the scale of that problem, it is a serious deficiency, isn't it?
Yes, our president has mentioned that we need at least 300 missiles, anti-ballistic missiles, to go through the winter, because Russia will be trying to make Kyiv unlivable, uninhabitable, and other cities by destroying our critical infrastructure, our economy. And in this regard, the UK sets excellent example to follow for the Trump administration, for the United States. So you promised, you have delivered on this promise, and you have provided these blueprints. I think the United States should do the same, and President Trump should follow through on his previous promise.
Yeah, I mean, Britain promised this help, and Britain is delivering this help. And what is the view, though, in Kyiv about the way that President Trump promised there would be licenses for Ukraine to help build your own equivalent of the Patriot anti-missile missile? It's a high-tech weapon and enormously needed. And then that promise by President Trump was snatched away. What is the thinking about the way the president acted on that?
Well, quite honestly, I'm expressing my subjective point of view, but it's difficult to understand because, in foreign policy, especially from a superpower like the United States, the leader of the West and the free world, if the president makes such a promise, it means a lot. It's about credibility, of his personal credibility and credibility of the country which he represents. And if he promised something, his word should be firm, no matter what. But when he backtracks or is trying to backtrack on this promise, honestly, I don't understand this.
Do you have any clear notion in your own mind then? And I realise you're speaking personally, you're not speaking on behalf of the Ukrainian government. Do you have an explanation in your own mind as to why the president did what he did, making a clear promise that Patriots would be licensed in Ukraine? That would be an enormous step forward. That would also have taken a good deal of time. And then saying that that wasn't the case, that promise no longer stood. Why do you think that happened, Oleksandr?
But it's hard to say. There might be different hypotheses or explanations for that. One of them might be that the addressee of this promise was not Ukraine. It was Putin. Maybe we're talking about some kind of political game with Putin when President Trump makes a statement and sees what will be reaction of Putin. I'm not sure. Honestly, I don't have any kind of definite explanation of what's going on. But since you have made such a promise and people rely on this, people have you created hope for Ukrainian people, and you cannot take it back.
I mean, again, so you're speculating now, which, as you say, is pretty much all we can do. But in your mind, it is possible, you think, that Donald Trump made that promise and then Vladimir Putin just talked him out of it?
Well, unfortunately, I cannot rule out this. I have no confirmation. I have no evidence about that. It might be one of the explanations, but for me, it's difficult to understand. I think that when the president makes such a statement, it's very serious. He's supposed to consult with the State Department, he has huge administration, lots of experts, and it's very serious statements, and people believe in this statement. So even if Putin is trying to talk you out of this, you are supposed to show that you are committed, that you after all, it's about making deals. Even in business world, if you make such a promise, it's more worth than any money.
All right, just last question. the balance of the war has certainly shifted. We're now seeing Russia, if it makes gains at all, it's making very, very small gains. And that's thanks significantly to Ukraine's enormous drone power and tech power and the way that it's harnessed AI and tech to its military effort. Oleksandr, do you consider this is a war that Ukraine can win? And if it does, what would victory actually look like?
Well, I believe that Putin has already suffered a strategic defeat because he's not capable to win the war. And it's visible, for almost 5 years, and he's incapable to occupy the remainder of Donetsk region. So it's impossible. It illustrates the fact that Ukraine cannot lose the war. But to win the war, it might be a longer process, because for us, victory means restoration in full of our territorial integrity, return of Crimea, return of our whole currently occupied by Russia territories. But how long it will take, I'm not sure about that, but we definitely not losing the war. And I believe that we are winning the war, even though the victory might take a longer time.
All right, Oleksandr, good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. That's Oleksandr Merezhko, the chair of Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Committee.